Welcome back to Quizlet Land. Today we've got 50 quick statements for you. Answer in just 6 seconds and see how many fingers you end up with. Ready? Let's dive in. Ever refuse to eat vegetables? If you've ever avoided trying a new food because it looked weird. If you've ever ordered plain food at a restaurant to avoid anything fancy. If you've ever picked toppings off a pizza. If you've ever refused to eat a dish because it had too many ingredients. If you've ever said no to trying spicy food. If you've ever skipped a meal because you didn't like what was served. If you've ever eaten only fries at a restaurant because nothing else looked good. If you've ever been scared to try a new fruit or vegetable. If you've ever been scared to try a new fruit or vegetable. If you've ever refused to try seafood. If you've ever only eaten food from one specific cuisine. If you've ever refused to eat leftovers. If you've ever turned down a meal because of its smell. If you've ever avoided food that looked too colorful. If you've ever said no to trying a new type of cheese. If you've ever asked for a sandwich with only 1 or 2 ingredients. If you've ever disliked food just because it was green. If you've ever picked out onions from your meal. If you've ever refused to eat a dish because it had nuts in it. If you've ever avoided foods with unfamiliar textures. If you've ever ordered the same thing at a restaurant every time. If you've ever eaten only bread at a restaurant. If you've ever been afraid to try a dish from a different culture. If you've ever avoided food just because it was too creamy. If you've ever refused to eat food that was too sour. If you've ever asked for a dish without any seasoning. If you've ever preferred bland food over flavorful food. If you've ever avoided trying food with an unusual texture. If you've ever asked for a salad without any dressing. If you've ever refused to eat anything with mushrooms. If you've ever turned down a meal just because it had garlic in it. If you've ever avoided eating at new restaurants. If you've ever ordered a burger with no toppings at all. If you've ever said no to trying exotic fruit. If you've ever disliked a food just because of its name. If you've ever asked for your meal to be served with no sauce or spices. If you've ever eaten just the bread from a sandwich. If you've ever refused to eat food because it was too crunchy. If you've ever avoided food just because it had seeds in it. If you've ever refused to eat something just because you couldn't recognize it. If you've ever avoided trying a food because of its color. If you've ever eaten plain pasta with no sauce. If you've ever refused to try any new drinks. If you've ever avoided food because it was too sticky. If you've ever avoided trying food that had herbs on it. If you've ever asked for a dish without any vegetables. If you've ever eaten around certain ingredients in your meal. If you've ever asked for plain rice instead of flavored rice. If you've ever refused to try a dessert because it looked strange.